Hello, Dean Ramos.
Hello. Hi, Professor Hayashi. How are you this evening?
Thank you. Well, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you for joining the class. I really appreciate it.
Oh, students. Hi, students. How are you doing?
In cyber world. Um, so the class is artists and designers now, and the idea is that people are being introduced to different artists, and right from the horse's mouth. So we're very happy to have you. We're very lucky to have you. And we just kind of start with maybe introducing. Could you introduce yourself and tell us the background of who you are?
Yes, I can do that. So, um, my name is Dean Ramos. I'm a professor at Maricosta College. I am an artist. I mainly do sculpture at this point, but I also do some 2D work. Other things I should say about myself is I live in Vista, California, so I'm a local. If hopefully, not hopefully, but probably many of the students in your class, I assume, are local. But I found this semester that I have more students than usual that are further away because of the distance ed thing. So, um, yeah, so I can share some of my artwork with you. I have images I can share at any point if you want to see any. So,
Okay. How about where are you from originally? Are you originally from California, or where did you go to
I
school, or what did
yeah
you take in school? I don't know.
yeah I no, I grew up in Chicago, in north side of Chicago. I lived there for most of my life in and around Chicago until in the suburbs or in the city until I moved to New Mexico when I was, what, how old was I? About 24, 25. So I was
A
Midwest,
young man. A young man.
Midwesterner up to that point, and that was like a huge change in my life moving west. It seemed so surreal. I remember when I first moved to New Mexico, it was a very strange, unusual place to exist. The landscape was so, it felt like I was on Mars. Just everything was, I remember everything was red. I was driving around and the soil was red. It looked like the surface of a different planet. Um, so and then I lived there for 7 years in New Mexico. Went there for graduate school at University of New Mexico. I started the program there as a painter. I was accepted as a painter, and I don't think I painted at all the entire time I was there.
Did you do your undergrad in art also?
I did. I went to a small college in Chicago, a small liberal arts college on the north side of the city. I don't think I knew I was going to be an art major. I mean, I knew I was talented at art, but after high school, I'd been always creating in high school, and everybody, compliments you and says, "Oh, that's cool. You're doing some amazing stuff." And then by the time I finished high school, I guess it was like a little bit of burnout. I was kind of like, I didn't feel like being, I don't know. I was kind of burned out from being creative. I didn't even know what the future held. I was kind of like, what am I going to do now? I mean, what's life about? You're so young at that age, and there's so much ahead of you that you don't know yet. So even though I was good at it, I don't think I really accepted that as if it was going to be something I was going to do later in life at that point. So
Did your parents support? What were they saying if you wanted to become an artist? Were they like or were they like or?
I was lucky. I was adopted as a baby, and my parents were always very kind and supportive of me throughout my life, always, which is nice to have. So everything I've ever done, they were supportive, and of course, it makes a huge deal because it makes a big difference in your life, I'm sure, because a lot of people, they don't have that, and especially when you're young. I think that can be very difficult because you're trying to find a sense of direction, and if you don't have somebody accepting your freely allowing you to make those decisions and kind of explore things, it makes it very hard on somebody. So, but I was lucky.
So what was the tipping point where you sounded like you were going to this liberal arts college, going like, yeah, art, maybe not, whatever. Was there like a tipping point? Was there a certain person that pushed you over, or some influence?
I'd say a couple things.
A masterpiece?
No, a couple things. It was like, so I went to college. I think it was my first, I don't know if it was my first semester or second, but I took one art class. It was a drawing class, which is what I teach a lot of right now. I teach a lot of drawing. So, but I took a drawing class. I don't know, just because it was a requirement at the time. I didn't necessarily think I was going to do anything in the arts still. But I took the class and I started doing drawings, and everybody's like, "Holy crap, it's really good stuff. It's like amazing." And then I'm like, "Oh shit, I guess that's what I got to do." Kind of, it kind of just kept going from there. Because
Yeah.
I guess I think people have to accept. They have to accept who they are and what their gifts are. And then from that point on, I had a mentor in college. He's a Chicago artist. When I started college, it was a very small school. We only had 2 full-time art instructors and I think maybe 2 part-time at that point. But there was another, they hired a man as a gallery director. His name is Tim Lowly, Lowly. Tim, he's a Chicago artist, and he's still working I went to North Park College. He's still there now. But Tim, he was working as a gallery director and teaching. So I think it was the sculpture instructor in the department, asked me if I wanted to assist him in the gallery. So that's how it kind of, we're still in contact with each other, but he began kind of mentoring me and guiding me and making me understand what it's like to be serious about art and art making, and kind of motivated me to think about things which I really didn't consider before. I didn't even know what an artist was. What is an artist? What is an artist? What does an artist do? Why do they do it? No, all those things I was completely ignorant of at the point. So, but that had a huge effect on me and what I ended up, what I've ended up doing now over the years from that point on.
So if you didn't meet Tim, you think you would have been a plumber?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think I would have been a plumber because I was already in school, and at that point I was already going to be an art major when I met him. It was I think beginning of my junior year when I met him. It was my 3rd year in, and I think I'd already declared the major, but I wouldn't have been out in the Chicago community going to art galleries. That has going out to actually real exhibition spaces and seeing exhibits and seeing real artwork has a major effect on things. If you've never done it before, it like changes everything, in terms of, because if you don't have that experience, it's you would be missing quite a lot.
Mhm.
So.
Hmm. So, can you you said you had a little slide thing,
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
I'm hoping that when I open this up here, I can put up this and still see you and I at the same time.
You don't need to see me. You're more important. As long as we can see you, that's the important thing, and your work.
I think at this point, I think we're both on. I think it has little thumbnails of us on the screen.
Oh, okay.
In the corner, they're quite tiny, but all right. Do you see anything?
Yeah, I see you, and I see the your work. Yeah, there you go.
All right. So I think ideally there's this weird kind of menu on top of my screen now, which hopefully it does not showing up. Do you see a menu on top?
No, I don't. I just see just blackness and a little big box of you, and a big box of your work. So
okay, so that's good. It sounds like that's what we want people to see. So, all right. So yeah. So this is I don't know if I should show this one first or go back to the beginnings of this series. Maybe I should do that first. Let's go back to a little further just so I can see. So let's go back to this here. So these are this is a mold on the right. It's a plastic fiberglass mold, and on the left is an original form of it's a human figure form, which is it's an original. But then I made a mold off of that, and I did this for an exhibition in 2017. So this was an exhibit where I showed with your Professor Hayashi. This one's in Nagano, at Komi Museum. So I didn't know why I was making these or what the purpose of them would be, but Professor Hayashi came to my studio and saw the concrete casting of this, which I believe is probably here. he saw a set of these in my yard. So I had produced this thing and it was just sitting there. And then the opportunity for the exhibition came up. And then there was this crazy idea that he had, which was to actually take the molds to Japan for this 2-week residency and reproduce these things. So I reproduced, the title of it's Face to Face. I reproduced, I think it was 16 sets of these busts. And they're bigger than life. They're probably 24 inches tall. So I cast a whole bunch of these. So this is more reasonably recent work.
So can you kind of like just one step back, is many of the people in the class probably don't know how the castings work and whatnot. So what do you originally make the first piece out of?
Okay, I have to go back. So that was the original one here on the left. That was, I used foam, and I think I used styrofoam. And I bought sheets of styrofoam, glued them together. You can't see every step. I glued them together with I think I probably used some kind of glue, or at this point now I found out you can do it with if you go to Home Depot, you can buy these 2-inch thick sheets of styrofoam that are used for insulating a house.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and you can glue them together with spray foam, which comes in a spray can. You put that between the sheets and press them together, and it bonds them. So I did something like that, and then you can't see all those sheets now because all you see is the leftover form right here. You see the left. So they're all glued together, and then I think I used Bondo, and Bondo is used for patching and filling things to kind of form and shape it. And then it's painted, and the reason why I had to paint it is if I didn't do that, this is kind of like, some of this is what you might do. It's almost like shaping a surfboard, And then and I bought these materials at a place on it's on the 76 in Oceanside. It's what's it called? It's a surf supply store where they sell materials for making surfboards. So on the right side here, the mold is made out of fiberglass resin that I bought there. And I put that 2 halves over the original form. The original form got messed up and it broke at some point because it got stuck in the mold, but that was no longer important. I think I had to remake it once.
So the original mold, you take the styrofoam, you glue it all together, and then you carve away at it with a knife or something?
There was a little bit of carving. I think I filed away at it, I'm going to do something I'm going to explore bigger pieces. I have a sabbatical coming up in the fall, and I plan is to continue working with concrete, but doing some larger sculptures. I'm not going to use molds that time. I'm just going to make original pieces, but I'm going to explore the foam technique again more to build on. Lightweight, so we'll see. I'll have to figure that out. But yeah, so then after you have the mold made, I think back here I have some photographs. I got to go back. Like here, so this is at the residency, and Max Lafano might be giving a talk in your class. I don't know at this point. Max is here assisting me, and Max was helping me. He was very helpful. I had the molds, had a bunch of them. So we're hand packing into the mold. And the reason why we did it that way, instead of filling the mold completely, we mixed a very dry concrete mix and used it like you would clay. So we grabbed handfuls and slapped it inside this form, built it up, and then let it harden. So yeah. So these are the molds, we're working in the background there. So yeah, so what I liked about using a dry pack is they all look so different. There's a rough surface, they look very earthy. There's kind of an unpredictable surface. If you pour concrete like you pour sidewalks, it's very watery and runny, and it's very smooth and elegant, but that doesn't have much personality. So this is like the whole row of them, and we're loading them here. They were heavy, you can tell. Both Max and I were grunting and groaning, having to move them. So.
Now, do you conceive these pieces? I saw a very quick drawing of them. Do you sketch them out first, or do you make a small maquette using clay or anything like that?
Yeah, I was at the time I was sketching them out, and with just I think that was back in there somewhere. There's one I can't remember where it is in the set. This was an early drawing, just an idea, of what it might be. I think it was more stylized at this point. And I also, it looks like many different things. It looks somewhat sexual in a way, like, like body parts, like a rear, or like, it looks like a heart kind of too, So that was just something that I was thinking about. So Yeah, so I did sketch it out. Now what I'm playing with right now, since we've been at home and I'm using the computer a lot more as an instructor, I've been trying to learn how to use a program called Blender, which is
Hmm.
it's a 3D sculpting software that you can download for free. And I'm trying to figure out how to render in three-dimensional space in the computer so I can, like right now I'm just creating this kind of form that looks a lot like the one on the left because I created all these other pieces then from that, when I went on using that form, trying to see what I can do with the form. It's such a simple, iconic, universal form of a body. It's just, this figure, straightforward, looking straight ahead in space. It looks like, you know, portraits that are from antiquity in terms of the pose, the structure, or it looks like Easter Island heads. It's kind of this eternal form of the body, this bust. So just trying to see what I can do with that and and these pieces I think are very psychologically charged here, either exploring connection or disconnection, or in this case, the one on the left, kind of these production of maybe thoughts or ideas. It almost suggests that they're coming out of the head. So I'm just kind of playing with what can I do with such a simple form that it's hard because it doesn't. I think the hardest thing is it's such a simple form that I don't even, at a certain point, what more can I possibly do with it? So the one here on the left was made in my studio before. This is another exhibition that was in Japan that Yoshi was also in with me, Professor Hayashi. And then on the one on the right is I remade the piece at the exhibition. The one on the left looked like an egghead. So I remade it and I split the center form and I thought it was much more interesting. It's kind of this repetition of this breaking or coming apart,
So how do these register? I noticed that some of them are outdoors and then some of them are indoors. How does that impact the work? Changing sites like that, changing locations like that, changing context.
I like the idea of having work outside if at all possible, and that's why actually over my sabbatical too coming up, I'm going to produce works that are specifically supposed to be outside. And what I like the idea of having something outdoors is because, um, a lot of people tend not to, in general, in their lives, go into museums or into art galleries. And I like the idea that the person that might not have an education in the arts at all or know much about art sees the work and just because they come across it in the world, and I think when it's in the building, there's far less potential for that happening by far,
Mhm.
so and that's part of the reason why I think I'm using such a universal form is I think this form speaks to everybody, even if they didn't have an art education. I would hope it's such a universal form. Everybody has a body, everybody is embodied, everybody feels things through their body. I think I'm trying. That's part of the reason why I'm using this form too. I'm using it because I feel it has the potential to speak to everybody,
Mhm.
and I feel by having it outside, it works better. But nonetheless, you can get cool photographs in such a dark space inside the gallery. And it makes everything look really amazing and important when it has darkness and it's lit with a spotlight.
Mhm.
But you deal with the environments that you're given. I wouldn't say no to an opportunity to exhibit in an art space inside, but definitely I think it limits your potential audience far more.
Mhm.
So
And how about the scale of it? Like, I think most people haven't seen this, but in terms of, um, is it life size scale, or if you were to make them, 10 times bigger than a normal human being, would that affect the
yeah,
presence of the piece?
I think it would. I wouldn't mind making some of these bigger, like I think they would be quite interesting. And other people have commented that too, that they would be cool public art pieces. I could see that, they would have, and that's something I see in the form. It's a very powerful form, it's a very strong form. Um, and I think if it was a bigger form, it would become even more, kind of eternal or universal or something, speaking to the world in a way, So but it's hard to have opportunities to make those huge pieces or the time to when you're teaching to be able to have those opportunities, So if something presented itself, I would consider it, but not right now. I haven't pursued doing a massive piece, no, but I think it could work. And I think some
And
of
you
my,
would have to
huh?
you'd have to rent a crane, right? I mean, because it would be
Yeah, yeah.
if these little ones were a two-man job, I think it would be like a, you know.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think the way to do it on a site would be to build it the way when you go to like the San Diego Zoo and they have all those rock sculptures that they build them on site, you know. So you would have to,
Mhm.
I think if you built the frame on site, like maybe welded the metal and then using it wouldn't be cast, is what I'm saying, you know.
Hmm.
But so it would probably change the surface a bit, but you know, I think it could still work potentially, you know.
Mhm.
So um so yeah. And then some of the pieces were, you know, about these relationships between the forms. And I think this one was interesting because I think it's called, I can't remember the name. It's something, I thought it was entrapment. I don't think it is though, but the one figure is kind of entrapping the other one with this form, but then the other one has the potential because it has the hole in its head also to hold the same device and entrap another one, you know? So it's kind of this circle. There's an opening in this one's head too. So this piece here is an Escondido. It's right now at an exhibition which nobody might ever see. It's at the California Center for the Arts, and that's something which you might want to tell your students about, Yoshi, because they're gonna Professor Hayashi. All the artists in the show, I don't know if all of them are, but they've invited us to do 3-minute videos about the piece in the exhibition. So it might be a site to send students to because there's going to probably be a whole bunch of 3-minute videos with artists discussing their work within the next
Mhm.
month or so. So, but, or if you need more speakers, it might be a place for you to explore the possibility of for another semester. So this piece here is ink on fabric, and it's this time exhibited in a very dark space. So, like I said, I don't do a lot of painting anymore. At the beginning of this PowerPoint, I have examples of very early paintings, but I think I'm more interested in sculptural forms. But in this case here, um, I needed a piece. One, that's what's so difficult. If you're an artist and you don't, you know, if you're not a world famous artist where museums are spending huge quantities of money on getting your work there, and you have to get the work somewhere yourself, especially in this case overseas in Japan, you got to consider how am I going to do that. So this piece was partially motivated by the idea I wanted to do a fabric piece that I could. So this piece here, it's even though it's like 7, 8 feet tall by 12 feet long by 4 feet wide, so it's quite large installed. It rolls up and it goes into a tiny, tiny box that's about 4 by 4 inches by 4 feet. You know, so you can get the entire piece into this box. Um, so yeah, so this piece was partially motivated by that, and also a different way of exploring kind of this anonymous human form. So
Now, what made you? Because I've known you for a very long time, but I always knew you as a painter and as a person who draws, and I've seen many of your lovely drawings. But what made you transition from that to you know to sculpture?
I can go back. I'm afraid to go back too far. You have to see everything really fast. You have like a seizure or something. It's so fast. So yeah. So what made, so these are like early sculptural. This is really early in college. So yeah. So I was primarily a painter, but I think even in these very early paintings in my early, probably late to early 20s, in my early 20s, like yeah, 21, 22, sometime around then. When I produced these, it was always the feeling that I was working on a painting that I wanted to. I always felt like I wanted to kind of enter into the painting, or I was physically in the painting as I was working on it. I felt like I was sculpting it within the picture, shaping things with a brush in a way.
Mhm.
It was always kind of the desire to be able to physically touch the things that I was working on or connect with them in a more physical way as I was making. So I think as I kept working, it just let that desire to have that tangible touching while working took me more to become more and more sculptural, you know. So,
Hmm.
and then these pieces here were probably my first. I came across these ultrasound images right as I was beginning graduate school, which would have been in, what year was that? Like around 2000 sometime, 20 years ago now, 20, almost 21, long time ago. An old man. So, yeah, so this is one of the first more sculptural, it's kind of a transitional piece, looking at this idea of this ultrasound image of kind of, it was of a heartbeat, this kind of mysterious, abstract, ghostly image. And then coming up with this composite of these different shapes and cutting them out and producing these pieces here, which were titled suspensions. So they're these hanging forms that hang in front of a wall and they move. So what I liked about these pieces is that they did move, you know, that they had the capacity to actually blow in the wind and move around. So there was an element of time in them. You know.
And the shadows, right? I mean, they would catch the light in different ways, it seems like.
Yeah, the ones I like best were the ones where the shadows weren't so strongly lit, but people tend to like to have the more of a shadow in the piece. But I prefer them like, this is the same piece, lit like this is the way I prefer them to be, so they're almost disappearing. But it seemed like galleries always want to show them like this, because they want, I think they want people to know it's there. but I've always, you know, I think I've always been in this space myself where, you know, where the physical thing isn't really what interests me, you know, as much as I think the emotion or the feeling or the concept that's there. But there's always, you know, there always has to be, as an artist who makes things, that you have to present something, you know. So I think I've accepted more in my more recent work the physical, you know, as being a real like thing, like kind of, and that's, you know, a whole different concept, is the idea of thingness, you know, especially as it relates to the human body. You know, the body is a thing, and it's a thing that we all inhabit, but it, you know, on one level that's what it is, and on other levels it's so much more, you know. So that kind of mysterious connection or between the two, or disconnection between the two, is interesting. So
is that the strongest concept that comes out? Is there like a concept that ties together a lot of your pieces?
Yeah, the body, even in these pieces here. I mean, these pieces, as I was making them, as you can see on your screen, I don't know, it's a drawing of railroad tracks, you know, drawn with metal points, which is very delicately drawn. These are very small. It says 10 by 8 inches. But when I started these images, I did this consistent repetition of these vertical lines that are about as close together as corduroy. And it did this whole covering of the surface, and I could spend 2 or 3 days doing that, and then I'd go back and start doing vertical lines in there. But the physical relationship of myself to the space, I think the vertical lines were related to my own body existing and living and standing in space. So that's why it kind of became this, you know, I don't know, it's like this significance of it was like, you know, kind of my own connection, or my own, I am here in the work, you know, this using the vertical. And that's why after this, I started exploring more the idea of line, because I thought the line was such a significant thing in this work. I'd explore it further. But
so even though,
go on. Yeah.
No, even though we don't see your body in the work, what you're saying is that you're the physical action of making these very tedious pieces make you contemplate about your own body.
Yeah, and I think like the most natural mark for me was to make this vertical mark, because it related to my own form, just up and down. You're like, paint the fence, paint the fence. You know?
Thank you, Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, so I every single one of these I just did that, except for this one. This was one of the last metal point I did. I decided just to push that all aside. I think this is the last metal point drawing I did. It was the most tedious one, layered. You know,
so can you talk a little bit about the metal point? Because I know a lot of students, when we're saying metal point, they probably have no idea what that means.
So it's if you look up metal point drawing, they used it in the Renaissance. Like if you go to galleries like the Getty or the museum up in LA and look at, they had some drawings that I saw up there of Michelangelo drawings. They had an exhibition, and he had quite a few metal points. So during the Renaissance, they did a lot of metal points. So basically what it is, you know, you need to have a piece of gold or copper or silver, and You could use other metals too. You can do it with, I'm sure you can do it with steel too. But the idea of metal point is that metal will make a mark. If you go up to a wall in your house, I wouldn't recommend it unless you don't. If you want to mark it on your wall, it's okay. But if you took a quarter and walked over to the wall of your house, you have a white wall and your walls are kind of matte white or a lighter color, but they're not shiny. And you take that coin in your hand and slide it down the wall. Metal will leave the coin and deposit itself onto the surface of the wall. It'll make a mark there and leave a mark there. And you can't easily erase that mark. So in producing these drawings, this one, it says gold point. So what I did is I went to a metal supply store at the time in Albuquerque for jewelry supply store, a jewelry supply store. And I asked for a thin rod of gold. And it was about as thick, a little bit thinner than a pencil lead would be in a standard number 2 pencil. And then I bought a drop lead pencil. It's a drafting pencil that has these 3 little claws that grab the thin wire. You just slide it up in there, sharpen it to a fine point on sandpaper. And then you're using that implement, that gold in this case, to make marks. Silver was actually used, and I did some silver ones too. I think.
Now, I'm sorry, is the surface, do you have to gesso it? I mean, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
people probably don't know what gesso is, but do you have to prepare it?
Yeah, in this case, yeah, you have to prepare it. So if you try to do it on paper, it won't work. But like the wall in your house, that's if you have a white wall that's matte, that has a surface which is, it's harder, it's harder than paper, so it doesn't give like paper. Because if you take that metal stylus and try to draw on paper, it'll probably cut the paper. But if you put a layer of gesso on it, it gives it a more sealed, harder surface. You can make marks. So gesso is basically, it's a white primer. You could actually just use primer even. If you were to go to the hardware store and buy a spray can or a can of primer, you could roll it onto a piece of paper and work with that. So yeah, just the metal will then deposit itself onto the surface. If you make a mistake, the only way really to which I made occasionally, I must have done it once in a while, but usually not too many. I was pretty careful in my mark making, but occasionally I would, if I made an error somewhere, I would take a very fine piece of sandpaper and buff off just rub the surface, and then it would kind of buff off the metal that was deposited on the surface. So I'll skip that. So I don't know. Do you have any questions about anything? Do you want me to keep talking? Let me go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can take us through one last set of maybe the installations. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was an installation that was now it's 13 years old at this point. Only shown once because it was such a tedious act of installing this installation. This was a metal arcs. So once again, kind of reflecting on the significance of lines in space. What else could I then do with those? In this case here, for this museum, I was aware of the space, but had never seen this space. So I don't even know if I knew where this particular piece was going to go, nor did I really know how I was going to install it. So I think I had some idea of how it would look. I had some idea of how it would look, but I wasn't 100% sure until I started the act of installing. So these were these bent metal arcs. And so these were actually, every one of these pieces of bent metal here consisted of a 3-foot long piece of welding rod. So with that, it's a very thin rod, about 1/16 of an inch in diameter, very thin. And you use it for stainless steel for welding. So you hold the welding rod in your hand typically, and a torch, and you weld with it. But I didn't use it for that. So I bought a whole bunch of these welding rods, and then I hand bent them. So I used a computer, and I printed out this parabolic arc, which was a very elegant form. And then I think I was watching TV or movies. It was such a laborious task, and I hand bent these arcs to conform to the printout. So I had this arc, and I had to hand bend every one of these things so they matched the arc on these piece of paper that I printed out. And it's probably each arc might be 16 inches tall by 12 inches wide at the top of the arc. And so I bent them all, and they were perfect. Then I had to, which I wish I had a picture of. I actually still have it. I have this box that I made because I had to travel with all these, 96 arcs or so. And I made the box with the same parabolic arc, and then I stacked them on there like they're riding on a horse, so that I could ship it without damaging these very delicate forms. And then when I got there, I had an assistant, Akinari. I can't remember what Akinari's last name was. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Is it Hattori?
But he's now a musician. He's now a famous musician.
So yeah, so Akinari was hugely helpful, because what was so difficult about this is, you have all these arcs bent, and then you have an idea of how you're going to install them. But the difficult thing is installing them precisely in space, so they create this composite with all the other arcs, this flowing movement. That's not easy to do. So you have to install one at a time, and then as we were installing them, they had to be level. So both sides of the arc, they couldn't be crooked because it would all look weird. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be somewhat elegant and orderly. So so I created this system, which you can't see. I don't know if you can see in any of the slides. No, not here. Yeah, you can on this one. I think you can if you don't see this bar. The top on the ceiling here are magnets. There's this magnetic system that I developed where there's strips of metal on the ceiling, and then these fishing line that's tied to the ends of the arcs, which I had to tie into the pieces first, goes up to the ceiling, and then magnets, really powerful magnets, were used to pinch the fishing line between the metal strips and the magnet. And then you could do a quick adjustment without having to tie and untie and retie things.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the only way I could conceive of before I got there, knowing I was going to install on the ceiling, to come up with a hanging system. So I had to develop that before I went there. So I went there with all these metal bars, all the magnets, all the fishing line, and all the arcs. And then I, began installing one at a time. It was a very difficult piece to install. And the other one for the same show, very similar installation with this one. This one was kind of relating to the Japanese prints, like Hokusai prints of rain falling. And so in this one, the same process of installation, fishing line up high. The difficult thing on these was installing these was that you can't see any of the difficulty. So that's what I like, that when you're left with an elegant piece of artwork, and I hopefully you appreciate the work having no idea how difficult things were to do, especially in such a simple piece, But the difficulty here was there was a scaffold that we had, and the scaffold only reached so high, and the ceiling was probably over 20 feet high. So my assistant Akinari at the time, who was very helpful again, refused to go up on the scaffold, because not only was I on top of the scaffold, but it was like 100 degrees in this space here. And then I was up on top of a ladder on top of the scaffold, which you're not supposed to do. And I was up on an A-frame ladder on top, which they say not to do, up over my head installing these things. And Akinari was down below. And I would ask Akinari about the angle of every one of these pieces of these dowel rods. And I say, left higher, right higher. And then he would tell me, and he would yell back up, which one, what he should do, like right lower, the tip on the top lower. So I was doing all the magnetic adjustments at the top. And it was a very laborious, everything worked out well, but it was pretty exhausting being up there. So. These pieces were inspired. These are line drawings, kind of related to the metal point drawings, but this time using horizontal lines to emphasize movement. These pieces you can't really comprehend. I was in Tokyo Station and photographing in front of a construction fence during rush hours, all these people walking by. So I made 8 of these. I think there's only several of them here. And the people became these very anonymous figures that relate, I think, to the larger installation painting with those overlapping figures are kind of this anonymous form, that's kind of happening here too. So what you can't understand from this image, there's no way to grasp it, is that the surface of it's paper with these horizontal pencil lines. And on top of that, I put watercolor. And I put kind of a pinkish and a bluish watercolor. Then on top of that, my wife, I asked her to pick up a tube of white watercolor, but she got the wrong color. She came back with a tube of silver watercolor. And what I ended up doing was I tried it on one of them. I took the silver watercolor and brushed it over the entire surface of the painting when it was done, of the piece when it was done. And it gave the surface this shimmery reflective appearance, which you cannot see in the slide. But it's very interesting when you're in front of it, because it creates all these other optical effects, because it's like shimmery and shiny, and it prevents you from seeing through it as much. It kind of creates this kind of ambiguous layer. But it was interesting that sometimes these accidents happen, you know, and it was something I never would have planned, but it's just because she bought the wrong watercolor, and I decided to just take a risk, but it worked out. So,
Well, what's becoming more and more clear to me as I'm teaching this class and showing digital images and whatnot, especially with the beauty of your work and how subtle it is that with many of our artists, you know, my students are getting this information and looking at these images, but really, I hope that someday, if you're listening, wherever you're at, I think that you'll be able to make an effort to go see a lot of Dean's work as well as our other artists' work, because really the whole experience of actually being in the presence of the work and the technique really shows when you're with the piece. And as much as we are trying here with the digital work, I think digital images, I think they don't do it justice. Especially, I mean, your work is so sublime and subtle. So I really appreciate you though conveying the information to us and giving us so much of your time to take us through the work. And so maybe in the future you can let us know when you have a big show where we can go see it.
all righty. Thank you for having me.
All right,
Okay.
appreciate
All
it.
right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, class. Good talking to
Okay,
you all. All right.
okay, bye.
Bye.